Master 2 float adjustment formulas, and you can adjust your float freely with precision every time. Float adjustment in suspended lead fishing is not only a distinctive feature but also a difficulty. It is complex with a great variety of methods. However, as long as you master 2 float adjustment formulas, adjusting the float will become very easy. After all, float adjustment is all about the balance of gravity, buoyancy, and supporting force, which follows a clear pattern. Veteran anglers have summed up 2 formulas, the most sensitive formula and the most obtuse formula. With the help of these formulas, float adjustment becomes extremely simple. The most sensitive formula. There are various float adjustment methods, such as adjusting with empty hooks, baited hooks, or no hooks. The formulas here all refer to adjusting with empty hooks, that is, the fishing rig is attached with a subline. The most sensitive formula is fishing depth equals adjusted depth, weight of double baits. This formula is actually for fishing in the upper water layers. Because the sensitivity or obtuseness of float adjustment is not simply measured by the level of fishing depth or adjusted depth, but by the state of the fishing rig in the water. When the hook and bait have not touched the bottom, and both sublines are stretched tight, the float adjustment is at its most sensitive. In this state, as long as a fish touches the hook and bait, the float will definitely show a corresponding reaction. However, in float adjustment, we usually do not simply pursue sensitivity or obtuseness, but the fish catch rate. So whether sensitivity or obtuseness is better mainly depends on the water conditions and fish activity. When using the most sensitive formula, the fishing rig is suspended in mid-water, and at this time, the gravity and buoyancy of the rig are in balance. From this formula, we can derive the bottom-finding formula: fishing depth adjusted depth, weight of double baits. To judge whether the fishing rig has touched the bottom, it is quite simple. When the bottom exerts a supporting force on the rig, the pull on the float decreases, which means the rig has touched the bottom. For example, if you adjust the float to 6 meshes, and after hanging double baits, the float shows 4 meshes, then fishing at 4 meshes is the most sensitive state. When finding the bottom, if the fishing depth starts to be greater than 4 meshes, the rig begins to touch the bottom. Therefore, if the weight of the bait is appropriate, not too light or too heavy, it is best to have a step to weigh the bait. Otherwise, you will not know how many meshes you need to fish to reach the bottom. This also indicates that when changing baits of different weights, you must weigh the bait so that you can judge at least how many meshes you need to fish for the rig to start touching the bottom. To the most obtuse formula. The most obtuse formula refers to suspended lead fishing, that is, the most obtuse state when the lead weight has not touched the bottom. In fact, The most obtuse state is when the lead weight touches the bottom, but if the lead weight has already touched the bottom, it can no longer be called suspended lead fishing. This formula is also very simple. Fishing depth equals adjusted depth plus weight of double hooks. When the float adjustment reaches this state, the double hooks will lie completely on the bottom, exerting no pull on the float, and both sublines will be curved. This float adjustment method is often used in wild fishing and is also known as the universal float adjustment because it can be used for all bottom fishing. In the most obtuse state, the weight of the bait has no impact on the float adjustment, so this method can be used when using relatively heavy or very light baits. For example, if you adjust the float to 4 meshes, and it shows 6 meshes after removing the double hooks, then the weight of the double hooks is equivalent to 2 meshes, and fishing at 6 meshes will achieve this state. With the most obtuse formula, there comes the formula for the lead weight touching the bottom, fishing depth adjusted depth and weight of double hooks. This formula is actually closely related to the bottom finding formula. The bottom finding formula shows that when the rig touches the bottom, the pull on the float decreases, leading to an increase in the number of meshes. As the supporting force increases, when the supporting force from the bottom on the rig reaches a certain level, and the hook, bait, and subline no longer exert any pull on the float, the lead weight will start to touch the bottom. Using the above example, when fishing at more than 6 meshes, the lead weight will begin to touch the bottom. It should also be noted that there is an interval between the most obtuse state and the lead weight touching the bottom. After adjusting to the most obtuse state, if you continue to pull up the float seat, there will be an interval where the number of meshes on the float does not increase. This is because the hook and bait have already completely lain on the bottom, and the supporting force from the bottom on the rig will not increase anymore. Although the number of meshes does not increase, the subline becomes more relaxed, and the lead weight gets closer to the bottom. When the fishing depth exceeds the critical value, the lead weight will naturally touch the bottom. There is an interval from the most sensitive to the most obtuse state. Many anglers like to mark this interval with 2 space beans, above and below. They move the float within this interval to find the best bites, so it is also called fishing within the interval. Please follow, save, and like. Updates are posted daily. Thank you, fellow anglers. Author profile: I am a self-media blogger who loves fishing and is good at sharing. Follow me, and we can exchange fishing skills and discuss every detail of wild fishing for anglers. Give a like, save, and follow to never miss the next update.